Now, October is Mental Health Awareness Month, and because of that, we're focusing on a number of issues, and suicide is one of them, and its association with depression and anxiety. South Africa is ranked 10th among countries with the highest rate of suicides globally. And for more on this, we're now joined via Zoom by Dr. Alicia Porter, who's a board member of the South African Society of Psychiatrists. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Hi, good evening, Peter, and a very warm welcome from a very warm Johannesburg this evening.
Yes, it is very warm in Joburg, isn't it? Dr. Porter, the first thing I want to clear up, because I think sometimes there could be some confusion, suicide doesn't necessarily mean a mental health challenge, does it?
Not always, but in a large percentage it does, but not always.
All right. Well, let's talk now about suicide, particularly in the context of mental health, because, as you say, the large part of it seems to stem from that. What is it about South Africa that puts us so highly ranked in the world for death by suicide?
I think, there are multiple risk factors when it comes to suicide. And I think as a country, we have quite a few of these risk factors that just increase the suicide rate. So, when we look at just individual factors, it's things like job losses, unemployment, occupational stresses, which currently, with the unemployment rate being what it is in South Africa, that definitely then contributes. So also things like substance abuse, adverse childhood events, and even things like depression and anxiety. Those are all things that increase, an individual's risk for suicide. And then you get community factors. And so, things like lack of access to health care and even, the stigma surrounding accessing mental health care, those also increase. But things like, bullying and relationship issues, all of which are quite rife in South Africa, domestic violence, all of these things are significant risk factors. And I think as a country, we definitely carry quite a vulnerability to suicide. And I think that's what puts us so high on the suicide,
All right.
High on the suicide rate.
Many of the things that you've described happen in other countries. So is there something that we are failing to do, failing to invest in, that perhaps could help and see higher success rates in terms of prevention?
I think that we definitely fail when it comes to prevention, because even our healthcare system is really geared towards crisis intervention. It's very hospice-centric. So we're not really good at primary prevention, early detection. And, a lot of the time, there is a link to mental health in the sense that a lot of mental health conditions, particularly depression, goes undetected and untreated, and that definitely has an impact on the suicide rate.
Who is committing the suicides the most in South Africa, and why?
So I think this is not just a South Africa phenomenon, but it is a global phenomenon where men commit suicide 5 times more than women do, and it's no different in South Africa. While women may attempt suicide, men are definitely higher when it comes to the completion of suicides by quite a significant percentage.
Why is that, though? What is it about the male psyche?
I think it has a lot to do with the narratives, around masculinity and, the macho narrative around. And I think it is perceived as weakness if men admit to mental health concerns, because there's definitely a fear of vulnerability. And so we find that men suffer in silence, and depression is often missed in men because it looks quite different to females, in that, men may present with substance use or aggression or irritability or gambling, and those kind of things, and they don't necessarily present typically because of all the narratives and the stigma. And I think that mental health in men is definitely more stigmatized than mental health in women. And so we kind of hold men to these boys don't cry, and vulnerability is seen as a sign of weakness. And so I think there's a lot of shame when it comes to men around mental health issues and mental health concerns. And so there's a code of silence, because, the suicide rate, like I have mentioned earlier, the suicide rate is 5 times higher in men than it is in women. But the rate of depression is 2 times higher in women, which means that I think there's a significant proportion of men where depression is being missed or it's gone undiagnosed, if their suicide rate is so much higher than that of women. So just by extrapolation, we're missing something.
I don't know, maybe I'm extrapolating, but I also get a sense that we're seeing an increase in younger and younger people attempting and completing suicide. What's happening to our teens?
100%. In the last 10 years, in the 15 to 24-year age group, there has been an astronomical increase in the suicide rate. That suicide is now the second leading cause of death in that age group, only after motor vehicle accidents. And I think that in the last 2.5 years with COVID, I really think that we actually don't know the extent of COVID, particularly on adolescents, in that there's been a complete disruption in development, and there's been a disruption in growth, there's been a disruption in their lives, there's been lots of losses. And while, as adults, there's been a lot of struggles and challenges, I think the challenges that have been faced by children are even more so. And I don't think that we actually at this point know the true extent of that, because I really think that what we are now experiencing is the mental health impacts of COVID. And the mental health impact definitely leaves a much longer lasting impact, and it's a much bigger footprint than the medical or even the economic impact. So the COVID pandemic is over, but we're definitely in the midst of a mental health pandemic. And also with adolescents currently, they also have more access to, the internet and social media and all of those things. They have shown a direct correlation that has also increased, because we now hear of teens who Google ways to die or by suicide. And so that access is also it has negatively impacted their mental health as well. And especially when it goes unchecked. And, kids these days are ingenious, and they're quite industrious in how they find things and what to do.
All right, perhaps finally, I'm sure that there are parents that are scared and worried, and maybe at home is the first line of defense and prevention. What can parents look out for? What are some of the signs that maybe my child might be in distress and needs help?
I think for parents, the important thing is that we need to understand in terms of where your child is developmentally and what is to be expected and what is outside of the norm. So, oftentimes, particularly depression and anxiety goes undetected because there's this misconception that it's just normal teenage hormones. But, when academic performance starts to get impacted, when there are sleep difficulties and, eating difficulties and difficulties with energy levels, and, your kids stop enjoying things that they used to enjoy, they start isolating themselves, not wanting to go out with friends, not wanting to socialize with family, those are red flags. And so those things need to be taken more seriously and not dismissed as just normal teenage hormones, or it's just a phase. Yes, you can get the irritability, yes, you can get tantrums, but when it's more persistent, it is a cause for worry. And when it starts to impact how they're functioning on a day-to-day basis, then, we do need to start acknowledging that there may be something more than just a stage of development, and we might actually be dealing with, depression or anxiety and those kind of things. And so, it is more preferable to seek help earlier, because the intervention might not necessarily be that they need medication, for example, but they might actually be sufficient to just have therapy. Whereas if it's left for too long, it's often where they would need both. So prevention is definitely better than cure in this case.
Dr. Porter, we'll leave it there for this evening. Thank you so much indeed. Always valuable spending time and talking to you about these issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's Dr. Porter, Alicia Porter, psychiatrist, speaking to us during Mental Health Awareness Month. And sadly, we're seeing increases in suicides. Africa generally, highest region in terms of suicides. And we'll be speaking to a WHO official in the next hour about some of the initiatives they have to try and deal with this problem across the